He stood at the podium, clutching the index cards he had rehearsed 100 times. A 13-year-old black boy with pressed slacks, polished shoes, and a nervous stutter. He tried to say his name. The room waited. Then a white administrator leaned forward and mocked the pause in his voice, repeating his stammer loud enough for the judges to hear. Laughter scattered across the auditorium. A few parents looked away. Someone whispered, "This is embarrassing." The boy froze, eyes wide, breath shallow. The administrator smirked and waved him off, telling him to sit down until he could speak like the others. No one stopped him. No one defended the boy. But in the very back row, hidden beneath a plain wool coat and quiet poise, a woman did not look away. Her hand tightened around the armrest. Her security detail shifted but stayed still, because what no one in that room knew was that the child they just humiliated was the son of the state's most powerful elected official, and his mother, the governor, was already planning her next move. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Comment below. The annual Tri-County Academic Showcase was more than just a school competition. It was a display of pedigree. Held in the gleaming auditorium of Westbridge Prep, a private school built on old Southern money and quiet gatekeeping, the event brought together top students from across the state. But not every child who walked those marble steps was welcomed the same. Elijah Williams was 13 years old, soft-spoken, brilliant. He read scientific journals for fun and built solar-powered engines in his garage, but he also carried a lifelong stutter that made every introduction feel like climbing a hill with no peak. His mother, Governor Denise Williams, had told him that his voice mattered anyway, that his ideas, not his fluency, would move the world. So when he earned a top spot in the showcase, it wasn't through favors or phone calls. It was through test scores that beat 99% of his peers statewide. The governor decided to attend the event quietly. She wore a long gray coat, pulled her hat low, and took a seat in the back row with no fanfare. Not because she was ashamed, but because she wanted her son to have this moment on his own terms. She knew how fragile pride could be at 13. How boys that age, especially black boys, needed space to breathe without shadows. Elijah arrived with his backpack and a box of neatly labeled project boards. He was the only black contestant in his division, the only one without a family name, that rang through the halls. His presentation, on kinetic energy storage, was one of the most advanced in the middle grade category. But even before the opening ceremony, quiet signals started to show. A white staffer at the check-in desk paused when she saw his name, then asked twice for proof of eligibility. Another judge scanned his ID card longer than necessary. His project board was accidentally placed at the wrong station, forcing him to reset with minutes to spare. The administrator overseeing the event was a man named Gerald Harrows, a stern-faced official with a crisp suit and a reputation for upholding standards. He'd run the showcase for over a decade, and though no one ever accused him outright of bias, parents whispered about how his praise always found its way to the same kinds of children: polished, wealthy, white. When Gerald saw Elijah's name on the presentation schedule, his expression didn't change. But when he saw the boy hesitate during roll call, pausing over the syllables in his own name, his eyes narrowed. He turned to a nearby judge and whispered something behind his hand. They both smirked. No one said the words aloud. No one had. The tension lived in glances, in misplaced forms, in the subtle but steady erosion of welcome. It was the kind of racism that didn't scream. It shrugged. Elijah, unaware of the whispers, stood by his table and smoothed his shirt. He had worked for this moment, earned it. He believed still in the fairness of hard work. In the back row, Governor Williams watched her son prepare to speak. She said nothing, but her silence was not surrender. It was the kind of stillness that gathers weight, waiting for the right time to speak. The showcase began with all the ceremony Westbridge Prep was known for: chandeliers lit low, polished wood beneath polished shoes, and a string quartet humming softly in the corner. Parents sipped coffee from catered stations, and judges in navy blazers lined the front row, clipboards at the ready. Names were called in alphabetical order. Elijah was seated last. One by one, students took the stage, most greeted with warm applause and small smiles. A girl from Woodlawn Academy presented a wind-powered filtration system. A boy from Greenridge Prep demonstrated a drone-based irrigation model. Each project was received with murmurs of approval. But when Elijah stood to present, something shifted. First, his microphone was turned off. Then his laser pointer flickered and died. Gerald Harrows, standing just to the side of the stage, called out that technical difficulties should not interfere with clarity, and urged Elijah to speak loudly and confidently. Some in the crowd chuckled. Elijah nodded once, shoulders square, eyes down. He took a breath and began his explanation. Slow, careful, each word placed like a stone across a river. His stutter surfaced in the first few lines. A pause, a breath, a repeated consonant, and then another. Gerald tilted his head dramatically, raised a hand in mock patience, and said, "Take your time. We've got all day." Laughter, low but unmistakable, rippled across the auditorium. One judge bit back a grin. Another leaned toward her neighbor and whispered, "Why would they let him go first?" Elijah blinked rapidly but kept speaking. He didn't skip words, didn't rush. He moved through the presentation, explaining kinetic coils and torque memory, his fingers tapping lightly against his thigh to steady his rhythm. But it didn't stop there. When his time ended, he bowed slightly and returned to his seat. Gerald made a show of checking his watch, then announced the next student without comment. Elijah sat alone, ignored while the other contestants were greeted with warm nods and small talk from the staff. During the lunch break, he tried to join. A group of students at a table near the back. They looked at him, then turned their chairs inward. A white boy with a prep school crest on his blazer muttered, "Don't stutter your order, man." No one stopped him. A nearby chaperone shifted, uncomfortably, but said nothing. Elijah took his sandwich and sat alone under a window, unwrapping it slowly. His hands trembled slightly. He kept his eyes on the floor. Back in the auditorium, the judges met privately. Transcripts later revealed their scoring notes. Elijah's presentation was marked, "Strong content, weak delivery." Another note, "Difficult to follow, confidence lacking." One evaluator wrote simply, "Not showcase material." Governor Williams saw it all, every twitch of mockery, every dismissive gesture, every polite cover for what was plain to her. She remained silent, a still mountain in the back row. Her driver, seated beside her, leaned once to ask if they should intervene. She shook her head, because she knew. Some lessons must be witnessed in full. The world needed to reveal itself before she could change it. When the time came to announce the preliminary scores, Gerald took the stage with dramatic flair. He praised several contestants by name, highlighting their leadership, poise, and clarity. Elijah's name wasn't mentioned. When it finally was, Gerald gave a tight smile and said, "Special recognition for technical merit, though we encourage stronger public speaking in the future." The crowd responded with polite, scattered claps. Elijah stood, unsure if he was meant to approach the stage. Gerald waved him up with a flick of his wrist. As the boy walked, a judge behind the podium made a faint stuttering sound under his breath. A few students laughed again. Elijah reached out for his certificate. It was blank. Gerald said they'd fill it in later. Then he leaned close and said, just loud enough to hear, "Next time, speak like you belong." In the back row, the governor did not flinch. But her eyes, sharp as winter glass, followed Gerald's every move. She reached into her coat, pulled out a folded folder, and slid it onto her lap. Inside were emails, documents, transcripts, everything she had quietly requested after seeing. Early signs of tampering weeks before. She hadn't wanted to believe they would go this far. Now she knew, and when the time came, she would not raise her voice. She would raise the stakes. The moment the final scores were announced, the air in the auditorium shifted. The gold medal went to a student from Bellhurst Academy, whose project, while solid, had been less innovative than Elijah's by most technical standards. Gerald handed her the award with a proud handshake and a wide grin. Cameras flashed. Applause filled the room. Then he called Elijah back to the stage with a tone that landed like a sigh. This next student, Gerald said, showed potential. A few rough edges, but we believe in encouraging growth. He held up a small certificate. No medal, no ribbon. A special mention for technical curiosity. As Elijah approached, Gerald handed him the paper and added, confidence is key. Maybe next time your voice will match your brain. A few gasps slipped from the crowd, quiet, startled, but real. One judge frowned. A mother in the back row whispered, did he just say that out loud? But no one moved. No one interrupted. Elijah stood frozen for a second longer, his fingers tightening around the certificate. It was blank again, the same as before. He turned slowly to walk off the stage. A few claps followed him. Sympathy, not celebration. His shoes echoed in the silence between them. Near the exit doors, a group of parents exchanged quiet glances. One said under her breath, didn't he only get in because of who his mom is? And that's when it happened. Elijah paused at the bottom step. His eyes scanned the rows of faces until they found the one that had been steady all morning. His mother, still in her gray coat, still seated. She didn't smile, didn't cry. She just gave one slow nod. Nothing more, nothing less. That was enough. He didn't leave. He turned back toward the stage, not to speak, not to argue, but to stand still. The boy who had been laughed at, minimized, and mocked simply stood. The crowd shifted in discomfort. Then a voice rang out, low but unmistakable from the back of the room. Mr. Gerald Harrows, it said. Everyone turned. The governor was standing. She had removed her coat. The room froze before the name even reached their understanding. A murmur spread like a rising wind. Phones lifted, eyes widened. The security detail at her sides did not move, but they no longer needed to. Gerald's jaw tensed. His smirk vanished, because in that single moment, every power dynamic in the room flipped. The woman he had dismissed all day, the child he had humiliated, the presence he had overlooked, now stood in full view. Governor Denise Williams walked forward, not fast, not angry, but with the quiet gravity of someone who had waited long enough, and nobody laughed now. Governor Denise Williams didn't rush. She didn't raise her voice. She walked to the front of the auditorium as if it were her own living room. The silence followed her, thick and slow, until she reached the stage where Gerald Harrows stood stiffly, still holding the unused medals. She looked at her son first. Elijah, she said calmly, you may take a seat. He obeyed without hesitation, walking off the stage, his chin slightly higher than before. She took his place, not at the podium, but beside it. Then she pulled a folder from her bag and began to speak. Before today, she said, I asked for access to scoring rubrics, evaluator assignments, and documentation regarding the fairness of this event. I was told everything was transparent, but I kept the request active just in case. She opened the folder and read from a page. Elijah Williams, marked down for confidence issues, noted for lack of poise and unclear communication, yet received a higher technical score than any other student in his division. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Several judges looked down at their hands. She continued, here is an email exchange between two committee members stating, quote, we can't just hand a trophy to the governor's son. He's smart, but he'll need to speak better than that. She placed the printed email on the judge's table. Then she turned to Gerald. You've run this competition for 12 years. In that time, your finalists have come from 4 private schools. Your scoring criteria, she held up another paper, was revised just days before this event to include presentation clarity as a weighted category. No notice was given, no adjustment offered for speech differences. He opened his mouth, then shut it again. She had not finished. Let me now read a letter, dated last month, from the State Department of Education. She unfolded a third page. This letter appoints me, effective immediately, as the chair of the newly formed Academic Equity and Standards Oversight Board. All state-funded events, this one included, now report directly to my office. The room stilled, parents leaned forward, teachers sat upright. Gerald stepped back a single pace. In this role, she said, I am formally opening an inquiry into the fairness of today's competition and the professional conduct of its administrators. No applause, no cheers, just the raw, stunned breath of people realizing they had misjudged not just a boy, but everything surrounding him. Then one of the judges, the same who had whispered earlier, stood. He didn't speak. He simply walked to Elijah's seat and placed a medal in the boy's hand. A small gesture. Quiet, but it echoed through the room. Another judge followed, then a mother. Gerald stood motionless as the ripple grew. The governor said nothing more. She placed the folder down, turned to her son, and took her seat beside him. Her hand rested gently on his shoulder. No gloating, no anger, just presence, and finally, respect. Have you ever been judged for how you look or where you're from? Share your story in the comments. Let's make space for voices that deserve to be heard. By the next morning, video clips from the auditorium had spread beyond the school, beyond the district, into national headlines. One recording captured the moment Gerald Harrows mimicked Elijah's stutter. Another showed the governor calmly delivering her remarks, each document laid down like a stone in the path toward justice. But the clip that spread furthest was the simplest one. Elijah standing alone on stage, holding a blank certificate while the room looked away. It struck a nerve. The school district issued a statement first, short, cautious, and vague. We are reviewing the situation. But the governor's office moved quickly. A formal investigation was launched within 48 hours into the academic selection process, scoring criteria, and conduct of the event's staff. Testimonies were collected. Anonymous at first, then braver. Students and parents came forward describing years of subtle bias. Elijah's story opened the gate. Gerald Harrows was placed on administrative leave within the week. Not fired, not disgraced, just removed. His name faded from the website. His contact email no longer worked. No explanation was given publicly. But no one asked. They had seen enough. But the reckoning didn't stop with him. Under Governor Williams' oversight, a new statewide mandate was announced requiring all academic evaluators to undergo annual anti-bias training. Scoring for competitions would now be anonymized. No names, schools, or photos shown during judging. Accommodations for speech and neurodivergent differences became policy, not request-based exceptions. The showcase would never again be held at a private institution. And Elijah, he returned to his routine. He declined media interviews. He never posted a word about it online. When a local news outlet sent a request for a feature, he politely said no. His mother never pushed him to be a symbol. She let him be a boy again. But others took notice. A STEM foundation, previously known for favoring elite prep schools, offered him a private scholarship, not as a gift, as recognition. We failed to see you, the director said quietly, but we do now. Elijah accepted it with a soft thank you and went back to tinkering in his garage. Weeks later, he was invited to speak at a youth literacy conference. He almost said no, but then, sitting with his mom at the kitchen table, he whispered, I want to try, and he did. Standing on a modest stage, not nearly as grand as the one at Westbridge Prep, he delivered a short speech. It wasn't perfect. His voice still stuttered in places, but his words landed clearly. I used to think my stutter meant I was broken, he said. Now I know it means I take my time, and that's okay. The audience rose to their feet. Even those who once pitied him now saw him differently, not as someone to applaud out of guilt, but as someone whose strength had nothing to prove, a quiet, deliberate kind of power. One of the judges from the showcase stood in the back of the room that day. She didn't approach him, didn't try to apologize. She just listened. Because sometimes the first step in reckoning is learning how to sit with the truth. And the truth was this: a boy stood still in the face of ridicule. And the world, slowly, had to move around him. 3 months after the showcase, the event returned, but not as it was. The name had changed. No longer the Tri-County Academic Showcase, it was now called the Elijah Williams Forum for Youth Innovation. A new banner hung across the auditorium of a public magnet school in the city's center. Gone were the velvet ropes, the polished chandeliers, the quiet dress codes. In their place, open seating, student volunteers, and a simple promise printed on every program: excellence without exception. Elijah didn't attend. He had been invited, of course, asked to deliver opening remarks, offered a seat on the new advisory board, even a tribute in the program's dedication page. But he declined, gently. He had already spoken when it mattered. Now he preferred his quiet, but his presence lingered in the details. This time, the projects were judged anonymously. Each presentation reviewed without knowing the student's name, school, or background. For the first time in the competition's history, students from rural public schools placed in the top 5. One of the winners was a girl with a speech delay. She built a voice recognition app that could slow down verbal prompts without distorting tone. She smiled when she received her medal and glanced briefly at the name printed on the event's banner. In the governor's office, legislation passed with little opposition. The bill, officially titled Elijah's Clause, mandated protections for students with speech impediments and neurodivergent traits in all state-supported academic events. It was the first of its kind. Simple, quiet, necessary. Governor Williams didn't hold a press conference about it. She signed it in her office, surrounded by educators, advocates, and a few students who had written letters to her after the showcase. On her desk sat a photo of Elijah, not from the competition, but one of him at 8 years old reading aloud in the backyard, stuttering his way through a paragraph with a flashlight in his hand like a microphone. It had always been his way. Gentle, persistence, never stopping, never rushing. At home, Elijah's life returned to its rhythm. His scholarship allowed him access to new labs, summer programs, and online courses beyond his grade level. But he remained quiet. He still preferred notebooks to group work, late nights of tinkering to school assemblies. The certificate from the showcase, blank and unsigned, remained on his wall. He never filled it in. When asked why, he simply said, "It's enough as it is. The schools changed. The policies changed." But perhaps the most lasting shift happened in the minds of those who had been there that day. Teachers who once ignored the quiet kids began to listen closer. Judges who had laughed now asked different questions. Even Gerald Harrows, disgraced but not erased, sent a letter to the new event committee. Not to defend himself, just to say he had begun volunteering at a literacy center. "Not as penance," he wrote, "but to understand what I didn't." Before, no one responded, but the letter was kept on file, and Westbridge Prep, once the gatekeeper of prestige, opened its next competition to public school applicants for the first time in its history. None of it was loud. No banners, no protests, no grand apologies. But brick by brick, the walls had shifted, not because someone shouted them down, but because a boy stood still and let the world correct itself. He had not demanded justice. He had revealed the need for it. Elijah never became a headline. He didn't seek out interviews, didn't stand in front of cameras, didn't retell the story. He simply kept building. Quiet machines, quiet ideas, quiet mornings filled with curiosity. To most people, he was just a student again. To those who remembered, he was something more, a reminder. His mother, Governor Williams, continued her work without ever mentioning the showcase again. She had no need to. The laws were passed, the standards were changed. The system now carried his name, not hers. In their living room, framed beside family photos, still hung the blank certificate from that day. It had never been signed, never filled in. Just a simple sheet of paper in glass. Below it, taped gently to the frame, Elijah had written a note in his own handwriting. Proof isn't always loud, and that was the legacy he left behind, not of anger, not of triumph, but of stillness, of truth held steady when the world tried to shake it, of a boy who didn't need revenge to be right. He had stood long enough for the world to see itself, and then he simply moved forward. If this story moved you, share it with someone who believes in quiet strength. Let's build a world where grace is louder than cruelty.